All right, it's 9, so let's get started. Got about 3 hours of lesson time this morning, but a lot of it'll be like you all getting to like explore and go try things out time. And just like quick announcement, we've got one-on-ones this afternoon. Brian dropped a sheet to sign up. Um, and just a reminder, those are like the squishies from last mod. And the only rule is that we're not going to talk about code. So feel free to sign up if you'd like to chat with us about anything other than what you spend the majority of your life on. And what else? I think that's all for me for announcements. Yeah, I'm going to drop some questions in the chat, and I'd love to like just get conversation started about maybe like some strategies for drying up our code for refactoring. Yeah, so if you've got an answer for either of these questions, please raise your hand and we will get started. Cool, Joshua, go ahead.
Something we talked about yesterday during our check-in was using inheritance to dry up code.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like a pattern from Mod 1 that was introduced to y'all, and now you're kind of seeing it used all over, you know, a professional open source web, I guess we could call it a web program, a web API that is Rails. And yeah, inheritance is one way that we utilize, you know, a built-in pattern of Ruby, really, because you can use inheritance without needing Rails. You just need Ruby code. But yeah, I like that example. Anything else y'all are thinking about? Kira.
I think I remember from Mod 1 we used modules.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of modules that, so you all built some modules in Mod 1, but we've also got some modules that come with Ruby, and it was a way for Ruby to like dry up some of their own code, and those are enumerable, right? So we can use an each on a collection, and everything that in each employs, which is like the more advanced enumerables, and then comparable, so where you get your greater than, equal, all of those. And that's like a way that now we can do that with multiple different data types and use those. And we only have to define that code once, or the Ruby maintainers only had to define that code once. Cool, Jake, what's up?
So kind of along those same lines, but like helper methods inside of a class. So anything that's used multiple times just by that one class.
Totally, yeah. A helper method that is used more than once, right? That's like, I would say like probably like the simplest example that we've used, where it's like, hey, I'm going to call this method multiple times in other methods, so let's just define it once. Great. Yeah, I think that about covers it. So today we're going to think about, or we're going to do some refactoring and some drying up of our views. So we're going to use partials is what it's called. And give me a, just give me a check with like the little yes in the participants panel if you like even glanced at the partials guide that I dropped. And I didn't give you all much time, so I don't mind if you didn't, but give me a yes if you did. Okay, cool. About half of y'all got a chance to look at it. All right, so then in that case, let's just take 5 to look at it. Just because I think it's like worth taking 5 minutes for y'all to read through. So I want y'all to stop. It's kind of short, 2 sections. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat, and don't read past 3.4.2. All right, so once you get to 3.4.3, stop reading, and let's just take 5 on this. All right. So we've got a very light understanding of partials and what they could be used for there. Any questions coming up based on what you read? Yeah, go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little uncertain about the syntax for it looks like search.
Yeah.
In like the @q do f. Yeah, so I guess we'll maybe cover that.
Not necessarily. I think we're going to keep it a little simpler than that. So I'm going to say that that's like a stretch for you to like think about how you would use the search, and what we're going to like focus on is like using like a more a simpler form to refactor.
Okay.
Yep. Kate, go ahead.
Okay, so more of an opinion question, your opinion question.
Yep.
I saw that one of their examples was a footer, but you can also set a global footer inside of the application record. No, the layout for the application. So like you can set that will show across every single page.
Yep.
That seems like a little better place to put it, but I'm curious at your thoughts.
I kind of think you could do both, to be honest. Like you could use a partial just for the footer, right? And have just footer code defined in a partial. And then you could render that as part of your application.html.erb if you wanted, but then it's just one line of code instead of, you know, the application.html.erb kind of like getting bulky by having it all in there. So you could use both, like both strategies would work for that specific problem, right? Like you're like, all right, I know I want my footer on every page. I'm putting it in application.html.erb, and I'm going to use a partial for my footer. So all of that footer view code is in one specific file, and when I need it, I just call render and footer.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor, go ahead.
So should partials always reside in that shared folder, or can you have like partials outside of that, or is that not good practice?
Yeah, so the shared folder is a good place to put it when you know it's going to be shared across multiple directories. But if you have, like the example that we're going to use today is going to be refactoring an edit and a new view, and those live in the same directory already. So a lot of times when you see a partial for a for like a specific group of views, it will be in that folder. So today we're going to start like under the artists directory, and then there's a new and there's an edit in there, and we're going to refactor those, and it's going to be right there in that directory. So when it's called, it's basically by looking at how we're rendering the partial, you can kind of see like, oh, this, you know, this is right here in this local directory because there's no prepending path to it. There's no like shared or something else like prepended to it, or the opposite, right? Where there is a path and you're like, oh, this is in the shared folder. It's probably used across the application outside of just this specific directory.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. I'm gonna do a little exampling, and then yeah, and we'll go from there. All right, so let me share one. All right. Okay. So these views are pretty similar. And this is in set list on the main branch. And this is, if I look over here at my edit, or I'm sorry, my tree view, I've got a, you know, this is in my views artist, and I'm looking at the edit and the new. All right. And so let's just make it so you can see everything. Cool. Everybody see that okay? Need me to zoom or anything? Speak now or forever squint. Okay. Cool. So what do you see here? yeah, I'll open this up. What do you see here that looks repeatable?
All of the form label tag, pretty much all the form stuff besides the URL.
Yeah, I like it. So basically, anything that ends in tag, right, is repeated here in this form. We've got the label tag, the text field tag, and the submit tag. The values for label and text are they're the same, right? It's for a name, but then our submit tag, so our submit button is going to be slightly different for them. And then we can also see in one of these up at the top in the form tag, for one of the forms, like we are explicitly telling it what method to use. And then for one, we are not explicitly telling it which method to use, because a form tag will default to a post. So if you don't see the method defined, like method patch, then you can assume that, hey, we're defaulting to a post here. Cool. Okay, so basically what I want both of these pieces of code to do is I want to be able to like comment them out. Oh, that's not gonna work. So I'll just move them down. I basically want to use my partial syntax here, and I want to be able to say like render, form, and then I want to pass it some things based on where it is, or based on which view that I'm looking at, whether it's edit or new, and I want to pass it what we'll call some locals, which we pass as a hash. And these are going to be like, basically you can think of them as variables that you can pass to the form that are dynamic. All right, so I'm going to use this partial, I'm going to use this, the partial, so that I can basically eliminate all of this. And whenever I need this specific form, I say, hey, here's the form, and then here's the dynamic values that you need to read based on where I'm calling this form from. All right, so yeah, let's get into it. I am going to, in my tree view, I'm over here under artists, I am going to create a form .html.erb. And one thing to note here when I'm creating this file is I'm using this underscore, and this is like the Rails convention for, hey, this is going to be a partial now, and it will be called in a very specific way where I can say, hey, render, and then partial, and then it will always look for it will look for whatever path you give it, and then you don't call this when you're calling render, but kind of like under the hood, it's looking for a file that starts with an underscore, because those are how we start partials, and this is convention in Rails, and it won't work without doing it this way. Joshua, what's up?
When you are naming additional arguments, do you have to explicitly name your partial as well? So like for this, it would be render partial : form.
Yes, so you need to explicitly tell it where to look for this partial. So you need to tell it what the name of the partial is, and then you have also, like, if it's not in that local directory that you are in when you're calling it, you have to give it like the path. And that starts at like views, is basically like, if you start with a path, it starts at views.
All right, thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Curtis, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about like scoping, if it was like maybe like require where it would look locally first and then like expand out, but you just kind of answered that. So.
Cool. All right. So I'm gonna put this form in here. So I've created a new file, and then I'm going to paste in what I had in here for my edit view. All right, and so basically what I'm hoping to happen here is I need a partial here, and then I think this is the correct syntax. Yeah, that looks all right. And I'm basically going to say like, all right, I'm going to render this partial, and then I'm going to see, I'm going to look for a file called form, and then I'm going to pass it some locals that are going to be specific to my edit view. All right, and so I am going to like kind of format it like this so that it's a little bit more readable on these lines. And so now I have to think, okay, what locals am I going to pass it? And so let me get this edit view or this form up next to it so that I can see it. Okay. So what's dynamic in my current form over here? What are the things that you are thinking I need to pass already? Anybody? Yeah, Jake, go ahead.
Your patch method.
Cool. So let's say that's something we want to pass. So one of my things I'm going to pass is method, and it's going to be patch. Cool. So anything else I want to pass? Cheryl, go ahead.
Let's say the path.
Yeah, so the path. So let's say path. And what is my path here? What do I want to pass?
The artist/artist ID.
Cool. All right. Anything else that I want to pass here? Yeah, Will, go ahead.
Would it be the wording on the submit button?
Yeah, for sure. So what do we want to call that?
So I guess update artist. Then.
Yeah, let's try it. Well, what do we want to name the key? What's like something that you would maybe name this key?
Submit tag.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like it. Submit tag. Oop. I'm like getting a little bit worried about the syntax here, but possibly. All right, and so this is going to be my, yeah, it still I think might work. So here's one thing that I'm going to say though, because submit tag is already like one of these keywords down here, I think I want to name it something else.
How about just submit?
Yeah. I want to be a little bit more specific. So maybe I'll say submit text, because that's not reserved. It's not like a reserved keyword or anything like that. Okay, and so now what I want to do is I want to actually like call these, I want to call these helper local variables where they are basically where I need them to be dynamic in my form, so in my partial. All right, so for form tag, it looks like that's going to be a path. So let's see if I can simply pass this like this. And then my method is going to now be represented by method. And then my text will be represented by submit text. I think I saw a hand go up. Joshua, was that you?
Yeah. If you were interpolating like within like your text field tag for the edit, the artist's name, like I guess never mind. I think I know how to do that.
Okay. All right. I kind of like, I won't say sprinted through this, but went through this pretty fast. Questions so far on like how these things are coming together. And what I'll say is this over here, this is my edit, and you can see that here. So this is where I'm saying, hey, instead of being an actual block of code, render this partial. That is my block of code. And then this over here is now my form. So this is my now dynamic partial that will have the ability to reuse, but there's like a couple of conditions here that are going to need to be passed to this partial every time for it to work. All right, Jake, go ahead.
So on the left is the file you created, the underscore form file, correct?
Incorrect. So on the left
Okay.
is my edit view.
Okay, so I guess how does the form get passed between these two if you're not really calling form specifically on the right pane?
Yeah. So basically what's happening is when I say render partial form, this form simply represents the naming of this file here. All right. So that's how I say in this view, hey, actually go look for a file called form and load that up. And then when that view is called, it is passed all of these local variables that we define as a hash here called locals. And then within my actual partial form, I have access to these.
Okay, so on the right is your underscore form.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I just got that backwards. Cool.
Cool. Curtis, what's coming up?
So kind of a two-part question. One, can you like nest partials? Like, can you call a partial and a partial? And two, if you can, should you?
That's a good question. So my thought is yes, that you can, because it's simple. It's like at any point I needed a partial in my form, I could simply ask to render it, right? Like I can, like this is still going to work even though this is being rendered somewhere. I can still do a render partial and then like my partial here. But should you do it? I don't have a great answer on that, to be honest. I think it's okay. I can't see why you wouldn't want to do it. I don't have a great answer, to be honest, on that question. I don't see a problem with it because like you're still keeping your code as dry as possible. I don't know if is anyone else on the call? No. Okay. Sorry, we don't have a phone a friend option. All right. So first answer, simplest answer, I don't know. Second answer, I can't think of a reason why not so far, and I have never tried it, so I don't know if it even works. But I would be shocked if it didn't work, to be honest. So
Okay. I was just thinking like when I code, I like to hide my mess and like
totally.
so just like build a bunch of building block partials and then build a partial for the view and then call that one partial that's made up of many partials. I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. And here's the thing, like it's gonna work. Like I just know it's gonna work, but it could be like maybe the argument against it, if I'm playing like devil's advocate, is like if you're calling render partial so much, it might be hard for like another developer to like go and like, oh, now I have to go here, now I have to go here. However, it's a trade-off, right? Like, and that'll be like a design decision for you to make. Like, is it still readable? Does this code like need its own file? And am I making it like more hoops to jump through to like put this in its own file? Or is this like is this a good use case for refactoring this into a partial because it's going to be used more than just once? If it's only going to be used once, you can do it. Is it the best practice? Probably not. Maybe you have an argument for it, but I would think like if it's used more than once is kind of like where I would want to start. Cool. Garrett, go ahead.
So it's a reusable form, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yep.
Like it's creating reusable form. Is there any benefit beyond that? Like, is this basically just, hey, we don't want to like have to rewrite. We don't want to we just want to save ourselves time, be more efficient. We don't want to create a new form every time. We use this. I mean, that's very helpful. Is there anything beyond that this is doing?
Beyond that, it's helping like your bulkiest views be like refactored into more readable views. So like that example I was talking about with Kate, where it's like, yeah, that like you can use a partial for your footer, right? and then that footer code lives in its own file instead of in application.html.erb. And so
Got it.
now you render that, and it's like, okay, your application.html.erb is like more readable and more dry.
Got it. So like these really, like, you should be a little stingy, I guess maybe a little stingy with how you use them, just in the sense that if it's a form that is sort of specific to literally like one place in your entire app, you probably won't use it. But if it's a situation where it's a form that the user is going to be filling out a bunch with similar information across multiple spots, then you definitely want to use it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to discourage, like, I don't want to like encourage the stinginess, because like you could always just put a form in a partial with the thought that, hey, it's in a partial now, so it can be reused really easily if we need to reuse it later on, right? If it's a simple form like this, right, there's, 4 things that you have to define, like form, tag, one field, and then the submit tag. It's kind of like, all right, like I'll just put this in a form to, you could definitely put this in a partial to start with, render that partial where you need it, and then have your kind of like thought going forward is, yes, I'm only using this in one place currently, but I can envision other places I'm going to use this moving forward.
So I guess my last follow-up question then, just based on that, would be, as a developer, like, where do you draw the line between, I mean, then are you just creating partials all the time and never creating forms, or is there some kind of line that you're working around where you will create a form in a certain situation?
I would probably create the form in the view I'm currently working on first, right? And then I would think about like how much overhead it is, or like, all right, I would look at the view and be like, is this view super hard to navigate and read? Is it, over 50 lines and there's a lot of like stuff going on, like iteration, like mixed Ruby with mixed HTML stuff, and like, is it hard to read? Would this form be easier to read or would this specific view be easier to read if I took this form out and put it into a partial? Maybe go try that, look at it and say yes, or say no, actually, like this form can stay right here because I can't think of another use case for it, and it's just fine. It like readability is just fine. So I'd kind of like make that decision based on the current context. Aiden, what's up?
Yeah. So is there any way to have a single partial be available outside of your like current directory?
Yeah. So that's where you can you could create like a folder over here in views called like, let's just say it was called shared. All right, and so now, like, I want partials that I know are going to be shared across multiple views to live in this shared folder, and then when I needed to call them, I would call it like this if it lived over there.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. All right, I'm going to take Cheryl, and then we'll take a quick break.
Thinking about like the header or footer, would that mostly be like, I'm thinking about with our project or something that has like a nav bar at the top with like 2 buttons. Is that something we could put into a partial?
Totally.
Mostly for, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to cut you off before you were done.
Oh, that's cool. I was going to ask, is it only for forms, but it sounds like it's not, so cool.
Yeah, no, it's not just for forms. It's for like shared, like code that is shared, right? Like views that will be used multiple times across your application is how, like, this is a form example, and I even put like at the bottom of the lesson plan, like I showed a form example, but like don't limit yourself on partials to just forms, right? It's like shared views wherever a view might be used more than once. Okay, let's take a break. Let's take 5. I'm going to run the test to make sure that things are okay, and then we'll have y'all go into breakout rooms and try it. Let's come back at 39.
Thank you, 39. Thank you, 39.
Okay. It's 39. Let's come back into it. All right, so one thing I want to show you is I have this test, all right, from the repo. Just edit artist. It's like a simple, like, hey, can you can you go to this artist show page, click edit artist, fill in the name, and then expect the artist to like update properly. And this is kind of my check to make sure when I did some refactoring into a partial, like, are things still working properly, right? And if I run this, cool, I still get a passing test. And one thing that you can also do, which is fun, is when you're when you're running your test, remember, you can always put a pry anywhere, even a view. So let's do that. And I'll put this up here so we can see it a little better. Maybe like that. Okay, where am I? All right, cool. So now I'm up here at this line 1, and now I have like the ability to like check, right? Check any of these locals that I defined, right? And I can just make sure, hey, are these what I expect them to be? Cool, they are, they aren't, whatever that is. But you can see like this actually like got passed from here as a local, and I can check that when I pry in and kind of like check all my locals and make sure that they're working properly. Okay, questions on this? Jake, go ahead.
So do you test your partials separately or just test them as part of your normal view tests?
Yeah, so you would want, like, partials are going to be dependent by nature, right? They're going to be dependent on some other view calling into them. So you would want to test, like, basically you'd want to test any view that calls your partial, but not the partial in isolation, because the partial depends on another view calling it.
Okay.
Yep. Good question there. All right, cool. So I'm going to give you some options. Actually, let's just decide now. If you would rather try to implement this in your project for the next like 25 minutes, give me a yes. And if you would rather do it in the set list example, then give me a no. Democracy, everybody vote, everybody vote. Come on, that's not everyone. We have, yep, we need a couple more. Good. All right, that's the majority of you. Okay, a couple of you have clicked it again. All right, cool. So we're gonna do the project. Here's the deal though. I'm not putting you in your project pairs in the breakout room. So that is the kicker here, but still fun. I'll have you all, like, maybe you can Rochambeau, or if you like want to, make a strong case for why you should share your screen and work on your own specific project. I'm gonna let y'all decide that amongst each other, but we'll be in pairs, and then one group of 3. And yeah, I don't think that the point of this isn't to like make progress on the project. It's like, take the simplest example you have of repeated code in your view and see if you can create a partial with that. All right, Garrett, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the each unique partial should have its own file, and those files should be named differently so that when we call like the form tag, we then call the specific name of the specific file for the partial we want to use in that
Absolutely.
particular code.
Yeah. So if I wanted to if I had another form in here that that I wanted to like yes to everything you said, and like here's how you would do it. If I needed another form, I would name it something different, like artistform.html.erb. And then what I would do here is when I was calling it, I would where am I at? Edit. When I was calling it, I would call this. So slightly nuanced, right? In the way that you call it, it's named with this underscore, but when you call it, you don't put the underscore. Is that helpful to see? Okay, I'm gonna open these breakout rooms, and I'm gonna give you all a bit to work on this, like 20, 25 minutes. Feel free to ask for help if stuff comes up. Two things. You should probably have a test to verify if things are working right when you do this refactoring. Doesn't matter whose project you work on, you're gonna get practice, but I would use Driver Navigator here so that everyone can be viewing the exact same screen. That's all. Questions about what I'm asking you to do? George, go ahead.
Yeah, when you say a test, I mean the existing test is what we're testing off of, right? Like, so you just want us to use code that's tested.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, because that'll be the way that you can hit your pry. Things go wrong when inevitably they will, and that'll be the way that you can check that things still work when you are calling the partial.
Cool. I just didn't know if you wanted us to write an extra test, right? I was like, okay.
It doesn't hurt to write another test, but not expecting it from you. All right, let's plan on coming back together at like somewhere between 10:05 and 10:10. And then what we're gonna do is like, we're gonna pivot into the API lesson, but we're gonna take like a break, and there'll be like reading and a video involved. So you'll have like time to kind of like do your thing. Yeah. All right, and feel free to ask for help. Things go wrong, hit me up. Okay, opening rooms. Resume. Okay, so a couple of things. I saw groups in really different places. And here's what I'll say, like going into your project, trying to implement these, start with the simplest form, right? The simplest one you have is where I would start trying to like implement a partial. Don't necessarily worry about like it being dynamic enough for two of your views, because it's a lot easier to start off thinking about a partial when you're creating your views, and it's a lot harder to retroactively like go back and like be like, all right, now my new view and my edit view have to use this partial, and like, oh, but they're so different. Like, so start with one and start very simple when you go to implement this, is where I'll say. Another thing is, one group ran into the problem where they're not using the Rails helper form tag, and they're just using the pure HTML form. And now you can see the limitations of that, because you don't get to use this like Rails syntax to pass dynamic values, right? You're limited based on what you can do if you're just using the pure HTML form. What was I gonna say? I think that's all. I think I saw a hand go up. Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, the one we had an issue. I was trying to do one with pre-filled values from one form. Is there a way to do that? We tried to pass it in as an argument and hope that it would just not care if we didn't input it, but it didn't work on how we did it.
You can.
Is there a certain way to do it?
Yeah, you can use pre-filled values. You need to pass whatever the object is as one of your locals, and then call it to pre-fill the values in your partial.
Okay, so for one, I had a new and an edit. One had pre-fills, one didn't, and that was where kind of we got tripped up.
Totally, yeah. So that's why I'm saying, like, don't try to do it. So I would say like a way to approach that is do a partial for each, right? Like, and separately, don't try to use it the same partial for both new and edit. In that case, I would say like, see if you can get a partial to work for edit, then see if you can get a partial to work for new, and then go from there.
Copy.
Yep. George, go ahead.
Yeah, we were question about the form typically goes to a post, like that's its method.
Yep.
So implicitly on like a new, for example, we were working on 2 different ones. Do we need to pass it in our locals? Okay, so we can just assume that it knows it's going to default into a post.
Yeah, well, you can always pass in a local and then
Mhm.
not use the local in that like specific partial. So
Okay.
like that's not actually the best design pattern. But here's what I'll say. I'll say like you might, if you're gonna use a form for an edit and a new, if you're gonna use a partial for an edit and a new, then just define the method explicitly, because you're gonna need it for one. Yeah, you don't need it for the other, but for the partial to work, right, you do need it. So I would
Yeah.
say like make that decision up front and explicitly define it, because it doesn't hurt to be more
Yeah.
explicit.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Because if I leave this out now, it's not going to know what to do for method. But.
Totally. Yep. Okay. Aiden, go ahead.
Yeah. Fun fact: it actually works just fine with HTML forms.
Do you want to show an example?
Yeah.
Cool.
So if I can share. I think I'm sharing right. Y'all can see this?
Yeah.
So this is my interaction form partial right here.
Yep.
It's only got a single variable because a lot of our forms were pretty
Cool.
much this. But it's like, it works basically. It doesn't work in here because I didn't put it in there. But like if I put it I put it in shelter show here
Yep.
for the update and delete and stuff, and it works fine. So
Can you put that on? Can you leave this on one side and then put the where your partial on the other side, so we can see both kind of like in action? Because I want to walk people through this, because this is cool. All right, so the thing to look at here is where the dynamic Ruby on the right on interaction form is called. So he's using like a pure HTML link there, but the good thing about it being an ERB file is anywhere you need to like embed, some dynamic Ruby, you can. And so I was saying kind of like the limitation of the form is like you can't use it with dynamic, or you can't use it in the same way that you would like a form tag, which is, I would argue, like slightly more dynamic. However, you can embed the Ruby wherever you need it to be. So you can embed this Ruby wherever you need it to be in a pure HTML form, which is what Aiden's done here. And I'll say this breaks a couple of like Rails conventions, and if you get it to work, that's great, right? Like it's cool. It's kind of cool that you're seeing like the power of like being able to embed dynamic Ruby where you need to. I'll say like using a form tag, or later a form for, which we haven't gotten to yet, is going to be slightly more powerful for you, as in just the way that you pass objects around and kind of like what it can do under the hood. But here's the thing, I would call myself like slightly incorrect by saying you're limited by the form. This is slightly less readable and still just as powerful though. Yeah, cool. Grant, did you have something else? No? Okay. All right, cool. So here's what we're going to do. So I'm going to drop this Intro to APIs lesson in the chat. We are going to take, there's 3 links at the top. There's 2 articles and a video. All right. So I'm going to say, write down at least maybe like 3 things you learned after you go through them, and then any questions, write them down. And what we'll do here is we're going to take 25 minutes to do this. Work in your break however you need to, and know that each article is around 5 minutes, and then the video's around 4 minutes. Does that sound all right? Okay, and then so we'll come back at 50, and we will jump into some discussion and then jump into the lesson. All right. All right, 10:50 has come. You all have learned what have you all learned is where this conversation is heading now. Anything that stood out to you across the articles or the video that you're like, oh, that's cool, didn't know about that before this? Curtis, go ahead.
I don't know. I just keep seeing this like meta design pattern of like MVC like showing back up. So like APIs kind of seem like, I can't tell if they're like a controller or more like a model, but like for a program to use instead of a user.
Yeah, I love that you're tying in this like idea of MVC. So I would say like with like you can think of the API as like the router, right? I want you to think of like the API as like the routes file, and the API is basically saying like, hey, when I get a request, like it doesn't even have to be HTTP, right? Like if it's a web API, that's what it will be, but it could just be some part of your application that handles requests and then responds instead of with a view, with data, with some piece of data that you have asked for from the outside of this application. You can think of it as like the layer that it's most commonly associated with is like the routing layer. So think of like MVC. It's like you need the M, you need the C, and now the V is actually data. Cool. Let's go to Joshua.
So I think kind of like a difficulty for me with like grasping the concept of APIs because there are like so many levels to it. I think one of the articles said that like even objects within an application could be considered an API because they are communicating information with other objects within your app.
Yep.
So I feel like the term API is like thrown around, but it's like, and I mean, you get used to it with like the context, but it just seems like API can be used for so many like different things. And I understand like like the responses with like data, but yeah, I think my mind's kind of blown a little bit by all the different levels.
That's totally fair. I think that's like completely fair at this point. And yeah, API gets thrown around a lot for a lot of different things, and it's just like I would think of it as like it's an access point for some outside entity to communicate with some programming interface. So it's like we're giving, like if you think about the class example, right, like any public methods available from outside of the class are now like part of the API, and then like private methods would be like, you know, encapsulated and like be only accessible within the internal state of this class. So that's like, hey, that's not an API now. Like those methods are not part of the API because something from the outside cannot access them. And so that's kind of where I want you to think about is like, how do we give outside parties access to our data without a view, right? Like it's just pure, it's raw data, right? It could be a string, could be, you know, an integer like returned from some method, or in the case of web APIs, which y'all are going to be dealing with like much more. And honestly, like at Turing, when you hear people talk about APIs, they're probably talking about web APIs. We're going to be returning Json, which is like we'll get into a little bit today's class, but it's basically like kind of like a formalized language of formatting data to be passed around from different applications to different applications. Cool, Garrett, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just perpetually lost. So like, I kind of get it. Maybe like, so if I wanted to build an API, I'm building an API to give other people access to my data. I wouldn't build an API to get access. If I wanted to access someone else's data, I would use the API that's already built, get that information, and then once I have that data, I could then choose to connect that data into a view that I've created to make that data presentable. Is that
That's
like
correct.
okay?
All
All right.
that is all correct, and the only part that I'll say that I would definitely want to differentiate is like you don't. It's not only one way or the other. You can either create an API internally to expose your own data, and that is like exposing an API, and then you can also consume an API by grabbing data from another application that has already been created in a specific way to expose their data, and then like you said, once you have that data, it's up to you as a developer to decide how you present it and what you do with it at that point.
Okay, so for me to there sounds like there is a couple ways that if I wanted to access another company's or another program's data that I could do it. Like one of those ways is that company sees that it may be profitable for them to actively create their own API to expose their data because it will further their interest. So they do that. And then I wouldn't need to build an API. I could just connect to their API, get the data and do that. Or maybe that company doesn't want to put in the resources to actually build their API, but they just set up their application in a way where they're like, hey, like, we're not going to build this for you, but if you want to like build it yourself and access our data, you're more than welcome to. So you can build an API to access data that they've made in a way that is accessible by an outside API. Is that?
The second example is less common, I'd say. Like there aren't many companies like, hey, here's access to our entire code base, build an API for yourself. Sometimes that might be the case between like a development agency that's like contracting and a large company that doesn't have the capacity. They might bring in someone to like build their own API for then customers and users of their app to like consume. But in general, it's like some company, like we'll use the Twitter example from the article, has built a public facing API that developers can access, that really anyone can access, but mostly it's developers that are accessing it. And then the other part of it is you build your own application, you start to get data that other developers might want to implement in their app. And so you give access to the data as a separate entity than your public facing app that has, views, that is like has an interface for users to interact with. And you say, hey, now I'm giving the developers a portal straight into the data. What you do with it is up to you.
Got it. And I assume at this point, like we're not supposed to, I mean, I don't have, like, I kind of get this concept we're going over, but like, I don't understand at all, like what it means to actually build an API to expose my data, or like even what language I would do that in, or what it would look like, or anything like that.
Yeah, and you will. You're going to do that. That's like one of the projects next mod. That was like my favorite project as when I was at Turing, was like we built an API and exposed our data, and it was pretty sweet. But yeah, so you'll do it next mod. This mod, we will focus on, like today I'll introduce you to consuming an API with like very little code, which is pretty powerful and I think empowering to see. And then you will have an opportunity in your group project to consume one and make that like part of your application. So mod 2, consuming. Mod 3, exposing and consuming. Mod 4, exposing and consuming. Yeah, just a little preview of what's coming. Cool, Curtis, what's up?
I don't know. Like I was very confused about this at first too, and then I realized like an API we've been using this whole time is like Active Record. So like Active Record is like the interface between like our Ruby-based program and like a SQL-based database. So like Active Record gives us a way to like talk in Ruby to something that doesn't normally understand Ruby, and that thing that doesn't understand Ruby to talk in SQL to like Ruby that doesn't normally understand SQL.
Totally. So Active Record you can think of as an API 100%, and it's such a commonly, it's the way that it's designed is so common that they even named it something different, right? They named it an ORM, but it does fall under the category of API. So like it's like all right, this is an object relational mapper. We've built like there's so many use cases for this that we'll give it its own name, but yes, it can also be categorized as an API. Cool. Zach, go ahead.
I might be going a little bit further down a rabbit hole than necessary at this point, but I think I'm starting to grasp this. But where, like, along the line, like, say with like a social media API or something, like, is that kind of getting into a weird, like, what type of data is accessible at a certain time?
Yeah, so
I don't know if
yes.
I broke it.
So yeah, you broke it down, I think. Like, so you would have maybe like a public facing API that anyone can hit at any time because that data already exists on the web facing app, right? Like anyone can go to someone's GitHub profile and like look at it. So now if you want the data associated with that profile, we'll make that a public facing API. But there might be some data that is unique to you that you want to get that you don't want other people to be able to see. And now you would have to authenticate as part of your API consumption to say like, I am this person and I get access to this API because, but like there's probably like an auth process involved in that where you have to like have an API key and like you did it when you set up your Git to GitHub, right? Your SSH key is like a kind of like a form of authentication where you had to like go get a key from GitHub and then like paste that key into your SSH file, and then now you can push and pull because you're authenticating through SSH. So you can think of that as like an auth process that like is using like in a similar way to like how an API would auth with a token. All right, Joshua, go ahead.
So some APIs, when you like submit requests, they it costs money to do so, to like receive that data back. For those that offer like free access to their data, what is the incentive of doing that? Is it like just like an altruistic, like, hey, here's our data? Or I'm just thinking of like Twitter, or Google, or Facebook, or whatever. I'm sure there's some benefit to doing that financially.
Yeah, it's giving other applications the ability to build in your data into their application further expands your own reach, right? Like it expands your own reach to programming interfaces that before didn't have a way to implement your data and expose your brand in a place where before that wouldn't have been possible. So it's like Twitter is a good example, right? Like Twitter has the public facing website, and then also think about how many places it can reach with the public facing API, where now people can embed that into their own applications, and now their reach has expanded exponentially beyond twitter.com, right? Yeah, okay, so Twitter maybe is not the best example according to Kate, but that's fine. Facebook, there you go. You might have heard of Cambridge Analytica and what they were doing with Facebook users' data. So it's like a good example of like when an API goes wrong, API design gone bad. Yeah, but cool. I think from this point, we're good to move on unless anyone's got any final questions or things coming up that they want to talk about. Okay, so we covered most of this. So we haven't really talked about JSON, I guess, is the one thing that we can talk about. So let me share. You bring this in. Okay, so basically like JSON is, yeah, it's basically, you can think of it in the same terms of like HTTP, like where we've like agreed that there's like going to be requests and they're going to be formatted this way, and it's like a language for servers to communicate. JSON is kind of like an agreed upon format of like representing just data, so like responses that are data based. Like JSON is kind of like this way that, yeah, it's the best way to like think of it as like machines could read it. Like there's a lot of like programming interfaces that can read JSON data, and we as developers can look at it and basically like pretty much understand what's being represented with the JSON data, because it looks a lot like a hash. All right, and so if I click on these, oh no, you hate to see it out of date. Okay, no, it's not. All right, cool. So this is JSON right here. So you can see it's got the curly brackets and then key value pairs, basically, where that's, I mean, it's not technically, it's not a Ruby hash. Let me make that clear, but it behaves very similarly to it. Cool. And then if I wanted to see this actually like in the browser, like what a response would look like, this is it. Yours probably looks, if you click on this link, a little dirtier, I want to say, like not as cleanly formatted. And that's because I have this Chrome extension that just like kind of works in the background. I think it's this one. Yeah, Json Formatter. There's a link to it in the lesson. It's as simple like install in Chrome, and all it does is basically like take this and format it kind of nicely, so it's not as gross. Yeah, this is what it would be raw, and parsed is kind of like new lines for each key value pair. All right, Aiden, what's up?
Yeah. So this is just like a Rails like interaction question. Is so like the params hash, right?
Yep.
Is that like sent to the server when you have like additional params? Is it sent to the server as like a JSON file?
I don't think so. Params is like, you can think of like everything in Rails and Ruby as an object, and we have to require the JSON library when we start interacting with JSON. So that leads me to believe that like params are a type of object that Rails is building in the background. And it's not necessarily it behaves very similarly to, and you won't really be able to tell the difference in the code than the way that you access information from params, a hash, or JSON, but they are different.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got this. Great. We're seeing, and in this case, like the client is still Chrome, and the response is simply JSON. It's a JSON response. It's not an HTML response. So the browser is like, cool, there's no HTML, CSS for me to display this page, but there is JSON, and here it is, like, and it can read JSON as well. Cool. Yeah, definitely put this in your browser just so like it's more readable for you. Okay, yeah, let's jump into actually making some of this happen. So if I go into set list, we'll say, let's go to the root of set list, and I'm gonna create a new file called API example.rb. I've got so many things open. Let's get them all closed. All right, so I've got this blank form. I'm gonna require these kind of like one at a time, and I'm gonna go through these line by line. All right, Faraday, new gem we haven't introduced to y'all yet. It's basically a way for within code you to send specific HTTP requests. All right, and so you'll see that kind of over here. hey, this is going to be a Faraday.get in here. You could send a Faraday.post. So it basically gives you a way to send a request as part of your code being executed. All right. Pry, you know about. JSON is the library that we're going to use to like parse a JSON response and really turn it into a hash that Ruby can work with. All right. So cool. Next thing that this does is we need to actually use Faraday to run our GET request. One thing you'll notice here, if I make this, and you're following along doing this. So this doesn't have to be in setlist, I should say. This doesn't have to be anywhere, really. Like this will work as a plain Ruby file anywhere. Anywhere you want to define a plain Ruby file, any directory, all we're going to do from the command line is we're going to execute this file same way we did in mod 1, and like we're going to watch it go. All right, so your GitHub username, you're going to want to replace that with your GitHub username, whatever that is. I think that's mine. We'll see. And then, yeah, we want to basically define a local variable called body, and then this will be response.body. And then, yeah, we'll put a pry because we can really do all of this in pry, but we'll get some code on the screen, and then we'll see if we hit this pry just fine. All right, cool. So I'm in a pry here. Let's exit. All right, so I put mine in set list, so I'm already here, but I can just execute this file. It's called API example, and we'll see what goes wrong because generally something goes wrong. Yeah, cannot load such file Faraday. All right. So if I do a gem install Faraday, we'll see if that does the trick. I kind of don't think it's going to do the trick. I think I have to add it to my gem file because I'm within the Rails framework. And I'm wrong. Not the first time that's happened. It looks like, I wonder if it just added it by default when I did that. I don't think so. No. Okay. So because I installed it at this location in the setlist directory, now I have access to these gems from this directory. But when I run my Rails application, it would not have access because it looks for gems in the gem file. So a nuance there to think about. Kira, I saw your hand go up, and then Aiden, do you have something else, or is it just still up from before? Looks like still up from before. Okay, cool. Kira, what's up?
I just ran Ruby API example.rb and it worked, and I don't have the Faraday gem.
It's got to be there somewhere.
Okay.
It's got to be like looking for it, like where it looked for it, it found it. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Like when mine didn't work. Yours installed probably somewhere, maybe globally on your computer that it was able to access, because that's kind of like how it's going to look. It's going to look local and then look global.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I just missed where you put that API example file at.
Yeah, good question. So I put it at the root of setlist. You don't have to put it at the root of setlist. You can literally just like create a directory anywhere on your computer or put this file anywhere on your computer. And the way that I'm getting the file to run, if we look over here, is all I did was I called Ruby API example. So like similar to the way you ran like your programs in mod 1, I just told Ruby to execute this file, and then it just kind of did that.
Okay.
Yep. Good, Kara.
So just a quick follow-up on my previous question.
Yep.
It must be somewhere on my system, probably from last mod 2. Is it good practice to go ahead and put it in the gem file you're working with anyway?
Not unless you're going to use it in that specific Rails application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you're going to use Faraday like in a controller, for example, in your Rails app, then like 100% you have to, right? Otherwise it's not going to work. But I'm not running the Rails application here.
Yeah.
I'm running a Ruby file that happens to live in this Rails application.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not trying to confuse y'all, but like I put this here in set list, but like you can put it anywhere. It's not, at this point, it's not associated with the Rails application. Okay, so let's look at these. Yeah, so let's look at response. Cool. A little bit different than the response object that you're used to seeing in the controller, because now this is a Faraday response because I used Faraday to actually make my request. So now it's wrapped in Faraday's basically API. Faraday's library has wrapped this response and created an object for me to use this way. Cool. There's a lot of, it looks kind of similar to the response object that's built for you in Rails and the controllers, because there's a lot of information there. But really what I'm concerned about is response.body. Cool. In here, let's look at what this is. Cool. So something to note about JSON is this has been converted to a string, kind of like under the hood by Faraday, but like the way that JSON is generally formatted is it is wrapped in quotes. So something to note, it's generally wrapped in quotes, no matter where you're accessing it from. Now it behaves like a string because Faraday has something going on under the hood where it is converting it to the string. So now what I want to do is I want to say, like, this isn't very readable. There's a lot of like string escaping going on here. So let's use my JSON library. And the way that we would do this is we do json.parse. And then in here, we'll pass in as an argument response.body. And now things look a bit more readable, right? I can see all of my key value pairs here. And now I have a hash to work with because I've brought in the JSON library. I've said, hey, parse this like JSON response and then give me a result that I can work with in Ruby, which is now a hash. So now it will behave exactly like a hash, but I had to make there were a couple of steps, right, to get it from a Faraday response to a JSON, we call them JSON objects, but don't want to confuse you. But from a JSON response to a hash that now I can work with in my code and manipulate in a way that's familiar to me as a Ruby developer. Yeah, questions. Garrett, what's up?
Hey, what are you running to hit the pry? Because I set up my file under vendor and I was trying to run RSpec, but it's not hitting it because it's not in my like test folder. So I'm just curious how you set it up so that you could hit the pry.
Yeah, totally. So I am in setlist and I simply made this API example in setlist. Here, I'm going to do it differently where I go back out. Okay, so I'm in a regular directory, right? I'm gonna touch API example.rb.
See what you're typing.
Oh, you can't see? Sorry. Okay, so I went up a level. Let's get rid of this because I just don't want this to confuse you. Now I've touched API example. I can do this anywhere. I don't need it to be attached to the Rails app. And now if I open this, cool, I have this Ruby file here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in the code from the lesson plan. Should work just fine as long as I replace your username with a real username, like a real GitHub username. This doesn't have to be yours, but that's probably the one you're most familiar with. And then now from this point, I've got this code that's going to execute. All I want to do is run the file, right? So if I ls, I can see, hey, here's the file. And now I'll just do Ruby API example, and then I hit the pry. So I'm just executing it like straight from the command line using Ruby. No tests, no other things. Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, when I do that, I just get like another terminal command line. Like it runs it, but it doesn't catch anything.
Gotcha. So do you have a pry in there?
Yes.
All right. Let's have you share and see if we can figure this out. Let me stop.
So like when I run it, then it just comes right back here.
All right, so can you zoom?
On the terminal.
Yeah. And then can you run an ls? Yeah, okay. So I see API example.rb, cool. Let's get out of setlist and try it somewhere else just to avoid that. So let's touch API example.rb from here. Cool, and then copy and paste the code that you have in the top right over there.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Into this new file, yeah. And let's just see if we can avoid the app being a part of it. All right, so now Ruby, yeah, Ruby API example. Great. All right, so let's do this. Let's quit the terminal. Yep. Cool, let's restart it. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Good thing to try. All right, and then let's go into wherever this is.
In the actual app or just like right here?
Right here is good.
Okay.
I think I know what's happening. This is like a weird thing that I've seen before where the pry doesn't get hit. Okay, so move the pry up to like line 6. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why this happens sometimes, but like sometimes if pry is like the last thing in the editor, it's not getting hit sometimes.
Okay.
I've noticed, and like I truly don't know why, but the only reason I knew that is because I've seen this before. Does anyone remember why that like has seen this before? If you want to just unmute, because I know we got some hands up.
It usually happens to me, but I have no idea why. So that's not really helpful. But
No, it's helpful. Jake, you know you're not all alone now.
Yeah, I did remember like Kat last month said to just put something behind it, and
yeah,
that
I would
can
put
help
like
trigger it.
Yeah, I would put like, I don't know why. I truly don't know why it skips over it if it's last because it doesn't happen for everyone. So did
And
you
it doesn't, like, sometimes I'll have a pry at the very end and it's fine. Other times
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's weird because like, and I had mine set up. I'm looking at mine. It's the exact same way that you did with like a new line after it, and it hit it just fine. So,
I was thinking about the order that it's required. I thought that had something to do with it, but maybe not.
Yeah, I wish that was the case, but mine's got it the same way that Jake's requiring it. I don't know. TBD.
Okay.
Maybe if anyone figures that out, please let us know. But I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time looking into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. There's another hand. Where's my participants? Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak to what Faraday is doing one more time. I was a little unclear on that.
Yeah, totally. So it's a gem for sending HTTP requests, and it gives you like a way to like we're using it in its most base form here. Let me just share real quick. So we're using like a basic GET request from Faraday, and you can Faraday is not the only library for making I can never say this, HTTP requests in your code, there's an HTTP like web request library you could bring in. It's just like basically it's a gem for making requests from Ruby code, so that you can it behaves a lot like Ruby. And a Git, it has it has access to all of the HTTP verbs, and then you kind of can feed it whatever URL you want to make the request to. It also can take a block, so you can set things like header, API token, a bunch of different parts of the HTTP request if you need them. You don't need them for this URL, so you don't have to set them, but it's kind of powerful in the way that it can, in the way that you can format your requests, and it's very readable to Ruby developers.
Okay, awesome.
Yep. Cool. Brett, what's up?
Yeah, so just like the API that we are consuming, like the api.github.com users, so forth. I guess what is the API that we're consuming? And do we have to put our username for authentication?
So you don't. This is GitHub's public facing API, so there's no auth involved. It's just hey, if you hit the right, if you hit the correct route, then it gives you a response based on the basically api.github.com is the base, and then I gave it users and then my username, so it was able to, based on this path here, say okay, I know where I'm going here. I'm going to the database, to the users table, and then I'm going to pull this username, and then I'm going to display the data that's associated with this username, which is all of this data it gives you back.
Okay, so it's just all your personal data, or all your data from GitHub. Okay.
No, I wouldn't say it's all my personal data. It's all my public personal data.
Okay. Because I just searched api.github.com and it just gave me a bunch of JSON.
So you did
api.github.com. Yeah.
Let's see.
And it just gave me a bunch of JSON.
Yeah. Cool. So it's basically, yeah, this is a request that works, where basically what it's telling you, this is kind of cool that GitHub did it this way. It's telling you the routes. This is basically a list of GitHub's API routes that you can hit. And it's kind of giving you them as links. And it's basically telling you what needs to be dynamic, what needs a query, and where you can hit things. So if we hit this one, for example, so I just hit the GitHub emojis URL here, and all I did was click on it. And now I get all of these assets that are basically all of GitHub's built-in emojis. And if I click on one, there it is. That's the asset that is a live asset that I can now access. So
you can consume that emoji API and use those emojis in your app.
Yes, you can.
Cool.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. So it's kind of cool. If you hit the base URL, what GitHub's doing is being hey, look, here are the things that you can here are the things that are public facing on our API here that you can hit. And the one that we hit is user URL, right? Because we did users / our username, and our username is the dynamic param there.
Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Joshua, go ahead.
So maybe first, a quick point to Brett's point. I think you're limited to the number of requests you can make to the GitHub API. It's 100 per hour or something.
Makes sense.
And then anything over that, I think you need an OAuth or whatever it is. So my question is, when interacting with the JSON parsed object, it looks like you can't necessarily input a symbol to access the value. Is there a way to change that so that it behaves that way, or?
Cool. Yeah, so you can't do that. Yeah, I mean, this is a hash, right? At this point, I hit that, it's a hash. I say dot class, yep, it's a hash. If I wanted to change all of the keys to symbols, I could do like in each, right? And then I could do a, I should have done a map, but I could do like k.toSym here. And it didn't change it, so let's do it with a map because each is going to return the original. Actually, let's do a transform. I think it's keys, transform, keys, and then that might not take two. Let's see.
But there's like not a like more simple way to do that when like doing the JSON.parse. There's not like a
There
method
probably
okay.
is. Like
Okay.
I would imagine that's built into the library. I'm just not like familiar with it. But
Okay.
like I got what I wanted here, right? Like I got my symbols if I wanted them, but like I bet there's a way that you can parse it to be symbols already. Yeah. Cool. Garrett, what's up?
So before we transformed it into symbols, right? The hash was just structured as the key was a string, and the value was, it looks like, also a string for the most part. So how are we? Because I tried accessing those key value pairs in the way I might try to access them with a typical hash, but I wasn't seeming to be able to access the values I was looking for. So I was just curious, with the way it's kind of set up originally, what's sort of the syntax for accessing those values?
It's the same way that you would access like on a normal hash. Like I just did this first key value pair is the login, and I did json.parse response.body, and then I fed it the key to get the value here. Cool. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Let's take a break, and then we're gonna do some breakout rooms where y'all are gonna try and get some data back from your own profile. All right, let's come back at 37.
Thank you, 37.
Thank you, 37.
This recording? Okay, cool. So it's 39. We're back. I'm gonna post some directions in the chat for breakout rooms. Basically using that example that we used, see if you can find your number of followers, date you joined GitHub, some other data. And then there's a checks for understanding in the API lesson plan that it's key for like y'all's understanding of API to think of like how it works, like answer those questions in Rails, and then like thinking in terms of like Rails, like who's the client, who's the server, who's the user, like in a Rails app that we've been using, and then how that would change if we're talking about an API now. All right, so now we're talking about like, hey, this is an API, and like, how does the way that you answer these questions change? And then optional, find another public API, see if you can consume it with Faraday, and see if you can get some data out of it to kind of like get some more practice with a different API, or hit a different GitHub API URL, so a different endpoint. Like we saw that list over here from the base URL. See if you can hit another one of these using Faraday and get some data back. Okay, Garrett, what's up?
So looking through like this example of the data we're getting from one particular API. Now this data set isn't insanely large, so it's pretty manageable to scroll through it and find kind of what you're looking for, at least the key name for it. But I would imagine for like significantly larger data sets, larger kind of APIs, is it sort of in the documentation, is there usually like a guide of like, hey, here are like the keys you might typically expect, so you don't have to scroll through them manually?
Yes, most of the time, like if you like Google like GitHub public facing API docs. Cool. Looks like that's Giphy. Interesting that that comes up first. But then there's the public APIs. This is not what I expected. It's giving me a bunch of repos. Okay, here we go. Developer.github.com. All right, so usually there is like a guide for consuming a certain website's APIs. And so like you would go here, like Slack has a good one, GitHub has a good one. However, not everyone has a great documentation. Like some of it's outdated, some of it's not updated. And so a lot of like our job sometimes is like, oh, we have to deal with this like outdated API docs and like try and figuring out how to, you know, hit the endpoints and consume the data. So think about that when you're creating an API at a company. Think about the pain that you felt when you had poor docs. Cool. Okay. I think that's it. The directions again are in the chat. Let me just repost them so they're at the top of the chat for at least a little bit until you all start chatting again. There we go. And then, yeah, I'm going to open these rooms. If you have problems, so I saw in the chat, like some of y'all are having problems like getting stuff to work. Just hang out here with me and we'll take a look. But yeah, I'm going to open these rooms. All right, and James and Zach, it looks like y'all are unassigned. Do you remember who you were with? Zach, you were with Jose and Roberto, right?
Yes.
Cool. And then James, you were with George.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to open it up. Any closing thoughts, cool stuff to share? Garrett, go ahead.
So when we were talking about like, hey, how would we incorporate this into like a Rails app? We were like wondering, is there a way that's not manual to turn this hash into a table?
Oh, I see. So like to like
Make the
basically
key
consume,
column.
yeah, consume the API and then create a table on the fly with that data.
And then yeah, you could like join other tables to it to then like connect the data in a way.
That's not usually a pattern that we'll go with, to be completely honest.
Okay.
But there is a way to do that. But like you probably would have the table set up beforehand, and then you would be like hitting the API and then like making a row with all of its key value pairs. That's just like not a pattern we usually use. Usually we'll build like a service to handle like that, the formatting of the data, and we'll format it with every request. So we won't like store it after that request, because usually when we consume an API, like we want it to update at a certain time and get like the most recent, like not stale data. Yeah. All right, we got 3 of y'all also. Yeah, cool. John, what's up?
Tim, very, very important question. So I did not have any followers. It's very upsetting, but that's not the point. So during the group work we did, I gained a follower, but it did not update. How long does it take to update?
You'd have to ask GitHub. I'm not sure, but that's like I'm glad you came across that example, because it shows you, right? Like GitHub, like how many resources is GitHub given to its API? It might have updated already, and what it's giving you is a cached response. And we won't get into caching until mod 3, but basically it's like, oh, he's already hit this. We're not going all the way to the database. We're going to cache this API response for 30 minutes, and here's the API data. Once 30 minutes time has elapsed, now we'll give you the updated fresh data. And what that does is it saves GitHub some resources.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Also could possibly not be how they're doing it, but it's a way. Cheryl, go ahead.
I wasn't able to get into any other ones, and I'm not sure, do a lot of them require some sort of like you have to sign up in order to get access to the APIs, or I just was having bad luck finding links, or?
I think you probably just had some bad luck finding links, but like I would say a lot of APIs require you to sign up and get a token. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like it's like GitHub does not based on that public facing one, but some do, like some do not. It's kind of like depends. Yeah. Curtis, what's up?
So I've been like struggling to see, like, because of active record, like where there's like opportunities to use just like plain Ruby in Rails. So like, is this kind of the main area where we're going to be doing like Ruby coding, is when we're like interacting with APIs?
I wouldn't call it the main area, but yes, it's one area. Well, you will build a class to basically like consume the API, and then you will build a class to present that data in a nice way that is like a plain Ruby object. And that is like one place where you will use plain old Ruby, but not the only place. Cool. Will, what's up?
Yeah, we were just talking about how we build this and want to make sure that kind of our understanding was correct, aligned. But so the idea that you'd maybe, if you're say Googling, I don't know, say GitHub API, would you have a model then in your project that would store kind of responses, JSON responses, and then you might have any method you wanted in that model, but then the controller would just be used to either write the query, maybe a dedicated controller would write the queries out to get responses. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's like a whole pattern, like there's like a couple of classes for like each of those kind of steps in the process. Like one is like general consumption, then the next one is like general formatting of the data and like you know, doing something that we want specifically with the JSON. And then another one is like what are we actually passing to the view, to like our view, or are we even like using a view, or are we simply like doing a render JSON and then passing it the JSON object? There's like a lot of ways, and like y'all will get into more of that in 3, not in 2, but yeah, this is like, and I wouldn't call them models. They're going to be plain Ruby objects. So like, they're not going to be attached to your database, but they're going to be like service objects. And then the other one will be like a facade object, which will like basically be like your presentation layer.
Okay, so for now, we basically choose a controller to request the data, and then we present it back out.
Yeah, exactly. Like basically the way that you would do it, that you'll probably do it this mod, is like it'll all be in like, everything will be happening in a controller action, and then we'll show you like a better pattern of like refactoring and drying that up. Yeah, cool. All right, I think that's all the questions. 5 minutes over. Sorry about that. We have one-on-ones starting at 1. If you want to sign up for one, you still can. And that's all. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this one. Y'all consumed an API if you hit that endpoint, so that's pretty sweet. And yeah, see you this afternoon if you're with me. Thanks.